Summary of Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. Overview. Kazuo Ishiguro's dystopian science fiction novel Klara and the Sun was released in March 2021 by the British novelist Kazuo Ishiguro. The story is set in the near future in the United States and is narrated by Klara, an android created to give children with companionship. Her journey as an artificial friend to a young, unwell child whose DNA has been tweaked for greater academic achievement is chronicled in the novel. Klara debuted on the New York Times fiction bestseller list after being published by Faber and Faber in the United Kingdom and Alfred A. Knopf in the United States. Summary. Most rich families in the world of Klara and the Sun pay to have their children lifted, a genetic engineering treatment that improves intellectual performance, without which there are few educational and career options. Children have limited opportunities to socialize since they take lessons with online teachers. As a result, wealthy families purchase Android AFs, artificial friends, to keep their youngsters entertained. Klara begins in an AF store with her pal Rosa and other androids. Manager directs and cares for them, and they take turns manning the store window. Klara is exceptionally perceptive and skilled at recognizing and interpreting emotional signs. After mistaking a homeless man waking up for a healing miracle, Klara learns to regard the sun as an omniscient creature with exceptional abilities. A large industrial machine named the Cootings machine has been parked in front of the store for several days, and the smoke it produces has obscured the sunshine. The AFs are visited by a variety of children and parents, but Klara's favorite is Josie, who promises to buy her something someday from outside the window. Josie has been lifted and is displaying symptoms of a mysterious sickness that can occur as a result of genetic tinkering and can lead to death. Chrissy, Josie's mother, ultimately returns. Chrissy interrogates Klara about her daughter's physical characteristics and requests that she replicates Josie's gait. They purchase Klara. Klara figures out how Chrissy and Josie's house is laid out. The housekeeper, Melania, is protective of Josie and distrustful of Klara. Klara is treated with kindness and openness by Josie, who takes her to her room every evening to view the sunset. Chrissy and Josie's relationship is a loving one, but it's also challenging and stressful at times. They witness the sunset over a barn from Josie's room, which Josie recognizes as Mr. McBain's barn and which Klara believes is the sun's evening resting place. Klara meets Josie's closest friend Rick, her only neighboring neighbor who isn't lifted. Chrissy and her family organize an interaction meeting at their home, where a group of lifted kids gathers to mingle. Rick also goes to school, but he stands out among the upper-class, elevated kids. Some kids tease Klara and threaten to toss her across the room, but Rick stands up for her. Chrissy and Josie had planned a trip to Morgan's Falls, but Chrissy is unable to travel due to her deteriorating health. Klara discovers that Josie's older sister, Sal, died of the same sickness as Josie. Chrissy instead takes Klara and confesses her dissatisfaction and remorse over her parenting. Chrissy has Klara impersonate Josie once again at the falls. When they return, Klara notices a change in Josie's demeanor toward her. As Josie's condition worsens, Rick begins to pay her more visits. Josie paints images of characters, and Rick fills in their thinking bubbles in the bubble game they play together. They argue after a time, and Josie apologizes by sending Klara to Rick's house with a sketch. Rick's home is cramped and run down. Klara meets Rick's mother, Helen, who wants Josie to help her persuade Rick to apply to Atlas Brookings, the only institution in the country that accepts a tiny number of unlifted students. Klara returns to Mr. McBain's barn after her visit to Rick's. She feels the light has the ability to cure Josie, but she has yet to notice her. Klara proposes that the Cootings machine be destroyed in the hopes that the sun will be pleased if the machine can no longer create pollution. Rick assists Klara on her trek to and from the barn, but she keeps her goal a secret from him. Josie is posing for a portrait produced by a man named Mr. Capaldi, and Klara learns that they will soon be going into the city together. Mr. Capaldi may have hidden purposes, Melania tells Klara. They travel to the city to see Josie's father, Paul, and Chrissy's ex-husband, Chrissy. They then proceed to Mr. Capaldi's recording studio. Paul becomes unhappy after seeing the incomplete picture and departs with Josie. Klara discovers the truth about the image, as well as her place in the family. Josie's portrait is a 3D AF model of herself. In the case of Klara's death, Mr. Capaldi and Chrissy intend to transfer her mind to a replica of Josie, and Klara will thereafter live as Josie. They leave when Chrissy expresses conflicting thoughts about the scheme. Klara takes Paul on a vehicle trip and persuades him to assist her in disabling the Cootings machine, which he achieves using a solution retrieved from Klara's neck. They meet up with Rick and Helen, and Klara joins them to meet Vance, Helen's ex-boyfriend who serves on the Atlas Brookings Scholarship Board. Rick shows Vance schematics of drones he's designed in a diner. Rick impresses Vance, but Helen irritates him since she has neglected him for years after their romance ended suddenly. When Klara returns to the country the next morning, she notices that a new Cootings machine has taken the place of the one she damaged. Josie's condition is deteriorating. Klara returns to Mr. McBain's barn and prays to the sun once more, this time invoking Rick and Josie's love. After days of rain, the sun finally shines, and Josie begins to feel better. Years pass as Josie prepares for her first year at college. Rick and she had drifted apart, although they are still friends. After Josie has gone to college, Mr. Capaldi comes to Chrissy's house and suggests dissecting her for scientific study, but Chrissy refuses. Klara's slow fade is the novel's final scene. She is immobile yet pleased to sit in a junkyard, watching the sun and reminiscing about her past. Her former shop manager visits her. Klara tells him she doesn't believe she could have taken Josie's place. Part 1. Narrator Klara is an AF artificial friend android, available for sale in an AF store. AFs are sold to wealthy families to help socialize children who have few opportunities to play together. From the middle of the store, Klara can see buildings, the sun, and Beggar Man and his dog through the window. AFs are solar-powered, and Klara is acutely aware of the sun's position and nourishment. Rex, another AF, tells Klara to touch the sun's pattern on the floor and teases her when it goes away. Rex is moved to the front window, and Klara notices a young girl admiring him. She speculates to her friend and fellow AF Rosa, she's going to choose him. She loves him. He's so lucky. The girl's mother, however, mentions that Rex and Klara's model, the B2 3rd series, has solar absorption problems, and they leave the store. Klara and Rosa are moved to the store's display window. Klara is curious about the outside world. She enjoys examining the buildings and observing pedestrians. Klara is particularly observant, sharing her thoughts on pedestrians' emotional signals with Rosa and manager. Rosa is uninterested, but the manager remarks on Klara's insight. Klara, you're quite remarkable. You notice and absorb so much. Josie comes to the store on Klara's 4th day in the window. She smiles and talks to Klara from outside, and Klara smiles and responds in pantomime. Josie tells Klara that she caught her eye when they passed earlier and promises that Klara would be able to see where the sun sets from her house. Josie's mother, Chrissy, gets out of her taxi and leaves with Josie, who promises Klara that she'll come back. Klara notices that AFs tend to avoid the store when they pass by. She also notices when people are unhappy or tense, and when passing children or teenagers are unhappy with their AFs. One day, Klara and Rosa witness a fistfight between two taxi drivers, and Rosa erroneously believes that the two drivers were playing. Later, a woman Klara calls Coffee Cup Lady recognizes a man across the street, and they embrace. Klara notes the intense mix of emotions on Coffee Cup Lady's face. A week later, Josie returns to the window and asks Klara if she'd like to be her AF, promising that she would enjoy living in her house, although some days I'm not so well. Klara likes Josie and signals affirmation through the glass. Josie promises to come back the next day, but doesn't. Klara and Rosa are removed from the window and replaced with three B3 AFs. Klara senses that manager is disappointed, though she doesn't say it. From inside the store, Klara sees the coatings machine in a construction area on the street. The coatings machine is an industrial apparatus that expels pollution from 3 smokestacks. The machine's exhaust is a nuisance due to its proximity to the storefront, and Klara resents that the smoke blocks the sun. After several days, the coatings machine is gone. 2 days later, a girl with short hair comes into the store and holds Klara's hand, but Klara doesn't smile at her. The manager notices Klara's reaction to the girl and sells her and her father a B3, the newest model of AF. However, the manager tells Klara that she won't cover for her again and that AFs are not supposed to discriminate between children. Rosa is eventually bought, and more AFs come and go from the store. The newer boy B3 AFs are rude to the older boy AFs, and Klara wonders how they could be considered an improvement. The manager puts Klara in the front window again. She notices the beggar and his dog motionless on the sidewalk and assumes they are dead. Later, however, they wake up and rise, and Klara concludes that the sun has a special kind of nourishment that can heal the sick. After 10 days in the window, Klara is moved to the rear alcove. Josie comes into the store with Chrissy. They don't see Klara, but the manager shows them to her upon hearing Josie's description. To test her observational skills, Chrissy asks Klara questions about Josie's eyes and voice. She asks Klara to replicate Josie's walk, which Klara does well. Chrissy and Josie by Klara. Part 1 Analysis. Klara and the Sun is the story of Klara's experience as Josie's artificial friend, but Klara's time in the AF store is important for both exposition and plot development. In Part 1, readers learn about AFs externally and internally, as AI programmed with unique personalities and as commodities in the novel's particular economic and cultural environment. Klara's encounters with Josie and Chrissy at the store foreshadow key elements of their relationships. Meanwhile, what she sees from the store window, the coatings machine, the beggar and his dog, and coffee cup lady, all influence her future actions. While the production and programming of AFs are never explicitly outlined, Klara's time in the store is a metaphor for childhood. She is equipped from the start with various abilities, but she is also designed to learn and observe. Because they are her first experiences in the world, the things Klara witnesses while in the store shape her understanding and actions for the rest of the novel. She observes and learns from anecdotal evidence. Much like humans, the assumptions she makes based on her observations are correct at times and incorrect at others. For an AF, Klara is particularly adept at analyzing human emotions. She can recognize the animosity between the taxi drivers fighting, while Rosa is not. She also makes huge errors, as in the case of the napping beggar, who she mistakenly believes is dead. Klara is surprised when a customer mentions the solar absorption problems of AF Rex's model in front of him, indicating that she and other AFs can have their feelings hurt. Klara's narration demonstrates a spectrum of understanding and feeling. On one hand, Ishiguro's AFs display traits typical of computers and AI, both real and in other works of science fiction. They perceive the world visually as an array of boxes. The label and inventory people and objects with simple naming conventions, i.e., manager, RPO building, coffee cup lady, and process observations with logical reasoning. It becomes clear quickly, however, that Klara is not an unfeeling robot. She has feelings and emotional responses, and she watches other AFs perform seemingly irrational human-like actions. The subtle disrespect that the new B3 boy AFs have for their older models, and the tendency for AFs in the outside world to avoid walking close to the store, both hint that the unique qualities of AFs include some degree of irrationality, imperfection, and preference. From the first page on, the sun is important and mysterious to Klara. She first refers to it as the sun on his journey, 3, establishing its role as an allegorical symbol for God. AFs are solar-powered, and while there is no indication that time out of the sun causes any technical problems, Klara feels better in the window than in the back of the store. Because the sun is so important to her, she assumes that it affects everything around her, leading to her conclusion that the sun's nourishment healed the beggar and his dog, and that the sun is offended by the Cooting's machine's smog. The world of Klara and the sun, which is ostensibly somewhere in the United States shortly, has particularly stark class divides. In Part 1, the manager tells Klara, "There are many children out there who would love to be able to choose you, but it's not possible for them. You're beyond their reach." The first time Josie talks to Klara in the window, Chrissy talks for a while in an idling taxi with someone, an expensive way to talk. Thus, readers learn that AFs are only available as a luxury for wealthy families. Klara's first interactions with Josie and Chrissy foreshadow the forces that shape their lives together through the rest of the novel. Josie recognizes and mentions her sickness to Klara, and Klara notices her slight limp. Chrissy asks Klara to imitate Josie's walk at the end of Part 1, the first indication of Chrissy and Mr. Capaldi's eventual plan to use Klara's AI as a replacement for Josie in the event of her death. Part 2. Josie's home becomes familiar to Klara. She uses a system of spatial boxes to see and recall environments, and she becomes puzzled when household things are shifted. She seemed often to wish to shorten the time I spent with Josie, which of course ran counter to my duty, Melania, the housekeeper, said of Klara's presence. Chrissy works as an attorney throughout the day, while Josie attends virtual courses with tutors. Every morning, Chrissy makes it a point to eat breakfast with Josie. Melania does not want Klara to have breakfast with Josie and Chrissy in the mornings, but Josie persists. Some mornings are nice and relaxed, but others are stressful. For example, Chrissy takes Josie's jokes far too literally at times. Josie and Klara watch the sunset from Josie's room most evenings. Josie interrupts a chat with her mother one night to take Klara upstairs. Josie tells Klara that the barn on the horizon that the sun appears to set behind is Mr. McBain's barn. Why would the sun go for his rest to a place like that? Josie wonders, laughing, you'd think the sun would need a palace at the very least. According to Josie, she once went to the farm with her close buddy Rick. Following a teaching session, Josie takes Klara outside for the first time the following week. They reach the top of a hill, where Rick is flying remote control drones. Rick has a harsh demeanor with Klara and is very protective of Josie. Despite this, Klara recognizes and likes their connection, deciding that she should observe him closely to understand how he fits into Josie's life pattern. Rick speaks with an English lilt. He is Josie's next-door neighbor, and his home is much smaller than hers. Josie and Klara have returned to their house. Josie and Chrissy spoke late at night about Josie's impending interaction meeting, which is a structured program when lifted children are brought together to mingle. The encounter isn't something Josie is looking forward to. Josie requests that Rick be permitted to attend the meeting because it is being held at their home. Klara arrives downstairs to discover a gathering of grown-ups in the kitchen, all of whom are women, while Josie's classmates are gathered in the living room. When Rick enters, the grown-ups are taken aback by his less costly attire. He strikes up a conversation with the parents before joining the youngsters. Rick seems so bright, such a shame a boy like that should have missed out, one mother says. There is angry language, hinting at the health dangers associated with the genetic modification method in which infants are lifted, and one lady makes awkward remarks about Rick's parents losing their nerve. Chrissy becomes sad and recounts Josie's elder sister, Sal, who recently died. Tensions subside, and Chrissy invites Klara to play with the kids. Klara observes the youngsters in the open-plan living room and notices their complicated spatial arrangement. Two females begin dismissively speaking to Rick, taunting him and referring to him in the third person. Rick becomes enraged, but Josie shifts the focus by introducing the girls to Klara. Danny, a little child, recommends hurling Klara across the room. Other kids put Klara to the test by giving her orders. She refuses to cooperate since she has no idea if Josie wants her to or not. I'd say it's your pet object, Rick says to Danny about a toy dog he carries in his pocket. To make you feel more at ease at events like these. Danny's mother interrupts, chastising Rick, but another parent calls her back to the kitchen, reminding her that disagreements are for the kids to sort out. Rick and Klara are left inside when the children walk outside. Rick warms up to Klara and tells her about his and Josie's plan, a vow they made to one another to be together for the rest of their lives. Klara thinks the conference was a source of valuable new observations, according to her. Klara discovers Josie's erratic breathing in her sleep one morning and calls Dr. Ryan. Chrissy assures Josie that if she feels better by the weekend, they would travel to Morgan's Falls. Morgan's Falls, Josie says Klara, is a wonderful waterfall that the family used to frequent. She gives her a photo of Sal from Morgan's Falls, and Klara discovers that Sal died when Josie was a child. On Friday night, Chrissy compliments Klara and asks whether she's satisfied with them. On Sunday, they eat a tense breakfast before departing for Morgan's Falls. Josie continues to be frail and sick. As she walks to the car, she attempts to conceal it, but Chrissy discovers it and confronts her. They're having an emotional squabble. Josie wants to attend, and Chrissy is annoyed with her for concealing her illness. Chrissy urges that Josie stay at home, despite Melania's suggestion that she might be able to make it to the falls. Chrissy takes Klara to the falls because Josie stated that she was looking forward to attending. Josie and Melania stay at home. Chrissy talks about her struggles raising Josie on the way to Morgan's Falls. Chrissy informs Klara that Paul, Josie's father, used to work at Kimball Refrigeration but was substituted. They leave the car parked and begin walking up a steep slope. The sight of a bull in a field disturbs Klara, who feels it belongs somewhere deep in the ground, far within the mud and darkness. Klara observes youngsters playing with their AFs, while Chrissy purchases coffee from a stall near the falls. Chrissy tells Klara about Sal, but she becomes agitated when Klara inquires about her death. Chrissy then requests that Klara be Josie. Just for a little while, says the narrator. Klara imitates Josie's demeanor and speaks to Chrissy as if she were Josie, making her illness seem insignificant. When they get back to the car, Klara notices that the bull has vanished. Chrissy urges Klara not to tell Josie that she imitated her on the way home. Klara tells Chrissy she has a real hope for Josie and hopes she will become better soon. When they go home, Klara tells Josie about their adventure. Josie is courteous, but Klara notices that her voice lacked a smile. Part 2 Analysis. Part 2 introduces readers to Josie's environment as a young, elevated student, as well as her mother and buddy Rick. Klara's friendship with Josie grows as she attempts to comprehend human nature. Klara is frequently perplexed by human behavior and is always attempting to examine and better comprehend their underlying feelings. She learns everything by trial and error. She nearly falls over once when the water from the kitchen faucet surprises her, but she quickly learns that a few specks of moisture are nothing to be afraid of. In many respects, Ishiguro blurs the border between human awareness and AI, utilizing Klara the AF as a prism through which to examine humans. Klara may have been programmed with some powers, but she, like any other person, must learn from her experiences. Chrissy reveals on the way to Morgan's Falls that her ex-husband Paul had been substituted, the first mention of the unlifted, post-employed professional class. Chrissy's first daughter Sal, who died of the same sickness as Josie, is also mentioned in Part 2 and later explained. At the interaction meeting, Klara is taken aback by the roughness with which some youngsters treat one another, as well as by the way Josie plays along with a nasty joke about wishing she had a B3, the latest AF model, at the meeting. Klara, on the other hand, is distinguished by her curiosity and innocence, and she gives the kids the benefit of the doubt, telling Rick that they fear loneliness and that's why they act the way they do. Klara's major purpose is to make the kid she is assigned to less lonely, which is a constant subject and worry for her. Throughout the story, she encounters, understands, and misunderstands the loneliness of the majority of the people. The discussion discusses the financial, societal, and scientific implications of genetic engineering or lifting children. Chrissy and the other parents had a serious discussion about the dangers of being lifted, including the chance of disease and death. The parents and other lifted children are not depicted in a positive light. They are condescending toward Rick, and the meeting's rules and arrangement are artificial. Rick makes an apparent joke about movie theaters, which the other kids misinterpret and don't get, emphasizing the class divide. Rick defends Klara by mentioning Danny's pet object, hinting that the kids are nervous and unused to social situations. Rick is initially frigid with Klara, but after the interaction meeting, she confides in him. The plan is revealed to the readers, as is Rick's concern that Josie would change and become like the other lifted children. Rick is a thorny but decent character, and Klara sees him as a potential partner in her efforts to aid Josie. The Morgan's Falls excursion sheds further light on Josie and Chrissy's difficult relationship, as well as Chrissy's guilt, tension, and vengeful inclinations. Chrissy uses Klara as an emotional outlet, unloading her rage toward Josie after she has been treated unfairly. "It must be nice to have no feelings sometimes," Chrissy says to Klara, to which Klara answers, "I believe I have many feelings. The more I watch, the more emotions open up for me." This discussion, like many other conversations and situations in the novel, raises the topic of what distinguishes humans from AI. Chrissy instructs Klara to replicate Josie's walk and, this time, her voice and attitude at the waterfall. Chrissy's guidance is a product of her sorrow, as well as a forerunner to the intention to utilize Klara as a stand-in for Josie, as it was in the AF shop. On the way to Morgan's Falls, Klara also observes the bull in the field. She has a strong reaction to the bull. She believes the bull came from the depths of the earth, and it becomes her emblem of darkness and evil. Klara senses Josie's underlying coldness when she returns. The Morgan Falls journey pushes Klara's comprehension to its utmost. She recognizes a problem but is unable to pinpoint it, leading her to accept that some human emotions and acts can never be fully understood. Part 3. Both Josie and Chrissy have become colder toward Klara after their excursion to Morgan's Falls. Josie's illness worsens, and she can no longer come downstairs for breakfast in the morning. Dr. Ryan makes regular visits, and Josie cancels her online lessons. Klara wonders why the light hasn't healed Josie, believing that the sun has healing powers due to her mistake about the beggar and his dog. She concludes that it might be necessary to draw his attention to Josie's situation in some particular and noticeable way. Rick arrives, and Melania tells Klara to stay in Josie's room while Rick is there so that no hanky-panky happens. Rick and Josie play a game called the Bubble Game, in which Josie draws figures with blank thought and speech bubbles and Rick fills in the blanks. They both like the game, and it lifts Josie's mood since they operate naturally with minimal dialogue. Rick's visits eventually become heated. He abandons an unsettling image of an eyeball tribe, and Josie finds his caption for a drawing of water blob person weird. Josie tells Klara that Rick doesn't want her to change, and gets accusatory when she's in any way he doesn't like, after Rick departs one day. Rick also mentions Mr. Capaldi, the artist for whom Josie has been posing for a painting, and says he is wary of him. Their bubble game was filled with danger, Klara feels. The game devolves into a savage discussion at one visit. Rick writes a harsh caption and leaves when Josie disparages Rick's mother. His visits come to an end. Josie declines Klara's invitation to play the bubble game in Rick's place. Josie creates a picture and encloses it in a huge envelope a few weeks later. Klara suggests that Josie take the artwork to Rick and apologize to him, and Josie agrees. Klara is on her way to Rick's. To manage the terrain, she had to focus hard. The ground soon became difficult to predict, a soft step often coming straight after a hard one. Rick's home was run down. When Klara arrives, he welcomes her in and apologizes for the odor in the living room. He reads the caption Josie scribbled on the envelope, "Rick and Josie forever." They discuss Rick's return to Josie's. Rick believes Josie owes him an apology and informs Klara that Josie sometimes treats him unjustly. Klara asks Rick whether there is a road to Mr. McBain's barn, where she says the sun rests every night. Rick offers to assist Klara in her travels, but Klara believes she must travel alone. Rick's mother, Helen, enters the room and finally welcomes Klara. Rick is uncomfortable because she is friendly to Klara, but harsh with her. Helen informs Klara about Atlas Brookings, a tiny institution that takes unlifted students. Helen is hoping Rick will be accepted. She approaches Klara and asks if she may coach Rick, as well as encourage Klara to ask Josie to persuade Rick to work hard on his application. She tells Klara about her childhood in England and relates a weird anecdote about seeing Chrissy wrestling outside with a girl who looked like Sal years after Sal's death. Rick says he could come to visit Josie once Klara goes. Klara walks down to Mr. McBain's barn just before nightfall. She has a harder time navigating the terrain, but Rick notices her and helps her to the barn. Klara orders Rick to leave when they arrive, feeling that seclusion is necessary for her to negotiate with the sun. Klara notices hay bales and shelves on the inside. Klara plays softly as the sun sets and orange light pours through the barn, creating the words, "Please make Josie better. Beggar man, just like you did." She recalls the bull at Morgan's Falls, staring angrily as if she had no right to be passing before his field, and is concerned that her assumptions may offend the sun. In exchange for mending Josie, Klara promises to do something to satisfy the sun, proposing that she locate the Cootings machine and put an end to its pollution. When the sun sets, Klara experiences a friendly darkness, which she interprets as a sign that the sun has heard and accepted her offer. When she exits the barn, she runs into Rick and expresses Helen's wish that Rick will put more work into his Atlas Brookings application. Rick visits us the next day. Rick and Josie are friends with one another, and Josie apologizes for her comments about his mother. Klara is asked to leave her room by Josie. Klara mulls over how to destroy the Cootings machine when she is approached by Chrissy, who informs her that she will be heading into town with Josie to sit for her photo again and would like Klara to accompany them. Mr. Capaldi has a special interest in AFs, she continues. Rick and Helen pay a visit the following Sunday. Helen mentions her secret weapon, an ex-boyfriend named Vance, who might be able to help Rick get into Atlas Brookings. Rick says he will try harder to get into Atlas Brookings, and Helen mentions her secret weapon, an ex-boyfriend named Vance, who might be able to help him get into Atlas Brookings. When they go to meet Mr. Capaldi, Klara discovers that Rick and Helen will accompany them to town. Melania pulls Klara aside 2 days later and tells her to keep an eye on Mr. Capaldi, since she doesn't trust him. Melania denies Klara's claim that she has a strategy to cure Josie. Klara hears Josie screaming under the covers late one night. Klara is told by Josie to go retrieve her mother. Chrissy enters the room and soothes Josie, who is struggling with the consequences of her illness. "Don't want to die, Mom," Klara says. "I'm not interested in that." Part 3 Analysis. Part 3 establishes the framework for the novel's climax and denouement, as well as the connections between Klara, Josie, and Rick, as it did in Parts 1 and 2. In her contacts with Rick and Rick's mother Helen, Klara continues to push the boundaries of her human knowledge. Rick and Josie started playing the bubble game during Rick's regular visits. Josie makes images and Rick provides the sketched figures and speech bubbles in the bubble game, which illustrates the communicative nature and potential of art. Rick and Josie may have difficulty discussing certain topics openly, but the figures Josie draws can represent Rick, Josie, family members, or other children without being to be explained, allowing them to communicate more successfully. The game eventually turns hostile, culminating in a savage exchange in which Josie attacks Rick's mother, and Rick adds a comment mocking Josie's sickness. This schism is a variation of the tension that defines Rick and Josie's relationship. They care for one another passionately, yet Josie is lifted while Rick is unlifted. They are destined for distinct destinies and detest each other for it at times. Klara hopes they can keep to their plan and be together since she doesn't want Josie to be lonely. Mr. Capaldi is now working on a portrait of Josie, which is mentioned in Part 3. Mr. Capaldi appears to be a weirdo, according to Rick, and Melania later takes Klara aside to make sure she keeps an eye out for him when they come to see her for her next session. Mr. Capaldi is working on a 3D AF-type body, a clone of Josie, that may be used to replace her if she dies, but Rick and Melania's fear foreshadows the discovery that the portrait is more than a painting. Rick and Helen's house is a shambles, and Rick mentions a foul odor in the living room, hinting that Helen may have an alcohol problem. Helen is presented to us, and her bluntness embarrasses Rick but not Klara. Another example of the subject of parental sacrifice is Helen's statement of her wish for Rick to go to Atlas Brookings and leave the house. Rick was never lifted by Helen. Helen feels terrible for not getting Rick the procedure, which appears to be crucial for professional success, just as Chrissy feels sorry for Josie's illness. Helen's secret weapon, her past friendship with Vance, a guy in charge of admissions at Atlas Brookings, is functionally identical to the process of being lifted, an attempt to stay competitive by securing an edge inaccessible to others. Helen and Chrissy's efforts represent both a parent's desire to provide chances for their children and the ruthless environment of competitive schooling among rich families. Despite the clearly pagan act of sun worship, Klara's relationship with the light becomes a more complete theological metaphor, touching on numerous facets of Christian theology. Klara is perplexed as to why the sun continued to delay in treating the helpless Josie, claiming that, for a brief moment, I even thought the sun wasn't kind at all, and this was the true reason for Josie's worsening condition. Her emotions are mirrored in the Bible's notions of uncertainty, notably in the Book of Job. These sentiments never persist. Klara always returns to her faith and expresses hope that Josie will be healed by the sun. Klara later adopts the traits of a Christ figure. She begs the sun to intervene on Josie's behalf, promising to give the sun something in exchange, which turns out to be the sacrifice of a portion of her being. Klara tries to connect with the light by thinking through her appeals, like a prayer, rather than speaking aloud. She is concerned that the sun is angry with her and is afraid of its vengeance. She interprets an odd sensation of benevolence as the sun agreeing to her arrangement when she offers to please the sun in some way. Ishiguro tackles the veil of unknowing typically expressed by religious views of God, just as he studies the challenges of communication and perception that exist between people. Part 4. Klara, Josie, and Chrissy are waiting for Paul, Josie's mother, and Chrissy's ex-husband in a friend's apartment in the city. In a cab, Paul greets Josie and embraces her. He gifts her a reversible mirror manufactured by a neighborhood buddy. Paul inquires about Josie's tutors, and Chrissy forces Paul to greet Klara. Chrissy and Paul have a tense relationship. In Chrissy's vehicle, they depart the apartment together. Chrissy and Paul discuss Chrissy's work, and Paul declares that he is content without one. I believe the substitutions were the best thing that happened to me. Mr. Capaldi has also piqued Paul's interest. They pass by the AF shop, but it has been demolished. Klara notices the neighboring Cootings machine. They continue driving till they reach Mr. Capaldi's studio. Chrissy informs Mr. Capaldi that she wishes to view Josie's incomplete picture, and he leads her upstairs. When Klara returns downstairs, she observes a change in Chrissy's demeanor. Mr. Capaldi then invites Klara to participate in a survey for his study, and walks her to a room with a computerized testing system. Through a glass door, Klara can view the others while she answers the survey questions. When Paul returns from seeing the portrait, he is unhappy and argues with Mr. Capaldi. Klara completes her test and enters the studio, where she notices the incomplete portrait. She realizes it's a 3D model suspended in midair. It nearly looks like Josie, but Klara sees that it has the incorrect hairdo. Paul is still furious when Klara returns to the family. He walks away, carrying Josie behind him. Mr. Capaldi tries to reassure Chrissy when she expresses her concerns. Mr. Capaldi and Chrissy inquire about Clara's thoughts on the image. I'd suspected for a long time that Mr. Capaldi's portrait wasn't a painting or a sculpture, but rather an AF, she says. Mr. Capaldi has captured Josie's outer features well. In the aftermath of Sal's death, Chrissy admits that Capaldi constructed an AF of her, but it didn't work out. Chrissy also discloses the genuine reason for their visit to Capaldi's workshop, as well as the motivation for her desire for Klara to spend so much time observing and understanding Josie. Klara is supposed to take over Mr. Capaldi's model and become Josie if Josie dies. Mr. Capaldi tries to persuade Chrissy to remain with their plan, claiming that her reservations about Josie's soul being irreplaceable are sentimental. Chrissy refuses to give him a straight answer and walks away with Klara. Chrissy asks Klara in the vehicle if she'd be cool with becoming Josie. She also expresses her feelings of remorse regarding Josie's illness. Klara agrees but believes there is still hope for Josie's recovery. Chrissy pulls over to the side of the road and embraces Klara, and Klara feels Chrissy's kindness sweeping through her. Chrissy pulls up to the cafe and enters, where Paul and Josie are waiting. Paul emerges, climbs into the car, and the two continue their journey. Paul tells Klara that he's never been good at, well, relating to your kind, and that he's never been good at, well, relating to your kind. Josie had inquired about the image, according to Paul, and she may have guessed the secret they were holding from her. Do you believe in the human heart? Paul asks Klara, after she informs him about the idea of her inhabiting the new Josie. Despite its intricacy, Klara feels she can discover Josie's heart. Klara wants Paul to assist her in locating and destroying the Kutings machine in the hopes of healing Josie. Paul is perplexed but agrees to go ahead with the plan. They travel to an industrial area and locate one of the devices near a warehouse. They discuss Mr. Capaldi and Chrissy in further depth. Paul argues that even if Mr. Capaldi is correct, Chrissy will never accept a new Josie. Klara is unsure how to turn off the Kutings machine and turns to Paul for assistance, as he used to be an engineer. Paul proposes that the machine's Sylvester Broad generation unit be given the PEG-9 solution. He informs Klara that she has a minor amount of PEG-9 within her mind. There's a chance Klara will lose some perceptive function, but she begs Paul to extract the answer, and the two of them work together to damage the machine. At a sushi bar, Paul and Klara meet Chrissy, Josie, Rick, and Helen. Rick and Helen are getting ready to meet Helen's ex-boyfriend, Vance. Helen suggests that Paul admires Vance, who has fascistic leanings, and Paul is insulted by her assessment of his political views. They allude to Paul's community, which he characterized to Helen as white people from the ranks of the former professional elites who are arming themselves against other types. They stroll together to the theater where Rick and Helen had set up a meeting with Vance. Klara informs Rick that she has finished the assignment she was assigned at Mr. McBain's farm. Cindy, a waitress who knows about the old AF store, is introduced to Klara by Josie. Klara's perception is blurry, and she takes longer to absorb and recognize the individuals around her than usual. Helen overhears fragments of conversations, including one between Helen and Chrissy concerning Paul and Vance, during which Chrissy asks Helen, "Do you regret it?" Helen says that she is not going ahead with Rick. Chrissy is approached by a guy with a white painted face and black hair who urges her to sign a petition against a government plan to move individuals. Chrissy informs Paul that she revealed the truth about the picture to Josie. Helen welcomes Vance and introduces him to Rick. The effects of Klara's disorientation start to fade. Josie and Cindy return to Klara but are interrupted by a lady in a high-rank blue dress who inquires about Klara's play ticket. Sought-after seats should not be taken by machines, the woman says. Cindy is outraged by the woman's rudeness, even though Josie claims they aren't going to the show anyhow. Paul departs. Klara goes to another cafe with Helen, Rick, and Vance, since Chrissy and Josie have more to say in private. Don't worry, Josie adds as she hugs Klara, who is now aware of the intention for her to inhabit her image. Nothing horrible will ever happen to you because of me. Helen, Rick, and Vance take a seat, while Klara sits alone at the booth across from them. Vance compliments Helen and inquires about Rick's encounter. Rick shows Vance his blueprints and describes his work on drone bird technology. Vance chairs the Atlas Brookings Founders Committee, which is in charge of the scholarships. Rick informs Vance that he is not seeking favoritism, but rather advice on how to apply to Atlas Brookings. They discuss the ethical issues of surveillance drones for a brief period. Vance changes the atmosphere by asking Rick what he wants if he doesn't want favoritism. Helen intervenes, claiming that they are requesting favoritism on her behalf. Vance warns Helen in an intense discussion that she has been ignoring him for years, citing particular instances when she has embarrassed or injured him. Helen begs Vance's forgiveness, apologizing for her previous irresponsibility. Vance exits as Rick attempts to halt his mother's groveling. Helen worries whether that was enough if that will satisfy him when Klara joins Helen and Rick in their booth. Rick is unhappy and refuses Vance's assistance. Helen and Vance's intricate past strikes Klara, and she recalls her chat with Paul about the complexity of the human heart. Nonetheless, she informs Helen that Mr. Vance is still very fond of Miss Helen and will decide to assist Rick. They return to the friend's apartment after Chrissy picks them up from dinner. It's possible now, we can hope, Klara comforts Chrissy. Klara walks into Josie's room, and Josie informs her that Chrissy has offered to quit her work so that she may spend more time with her. The next morning, they go home, and Klara is concerned that the sun would not aid Josie. Klara is surprised and disturbed when she sees a new Cootings machine has taken the place of the one she damaged as they pass by the RPO building and the old AF store. Part 4 Analysis. Part 4 takes place entirely outside of Josie and Chrissy's home, in the city. The novel's finale, which reveals the actual reason for Klara's purchase, is found here. Readers discover more about the novel's economic and political landscape through Paul's introduction. Klara's sensory bewilderment is exacerbated by the noisy city and crowd outside the theater, and her narration is somewhat muddled. Klara completes her sacrifice only to be met with a new Cootings machine, making her fear that her efforts were in vain. Readers construct together a picture of Paul's life and role in the political world of Klara and the Sun through Paul's chats in the vehicle with Chrissy and in the sushi cafe with Helen. Paul tells Chrissy that he enjoys being part of his network of like-minded individuals. Helen tells Paul that his white friends and his ideas on race and politics sound a little fascistic, and Josie asks him, "Why do you keep living in a place where there are gangs and guns?" Paul's community of unhappy, substituted ex-professionals appears to be in a more hazardous area. They are also said to have hatred toward the government and groups of various racial origins. Ironically, the prevailing system resembles fascism in that it provides chances exclusively to rich, well-educated offspring. Chrissy's interaction with the man with the white-painted face and black hair outside the cinema is another proof of tribalistic political dissent. Even though Ishiguro gives little information about any of the characters' political beliefs, he hints that the economic consequences of genetic editing and job substitutes have led to the rise of conservative forces. After witnessing Mr. Capaldi's incomplete picture of Josie, both Chrissy and Paul are distressed to various degrees. Mr. Capaldi tries to persuade them that their fears are unfounded and that an AI version of Josie will be just as genuine as the actual Josie. Neither parent is completely persuaded. This is the first time that the possibility of an AI becoming functionally or indistinguishable from a human heart or soul has been raised. The perspectives of Chrissy, Paul, and Klara on this issue are complex and shift throughout the story. Mr. Capaldi's scheme initially has Chrissy on board, but she subsequently rejects him. Chrissy would never accept an AI version of Josie, Paul assures Klara. Klara later assures Mr. Capaldi that, despite Josie's heart and mind's complexity, she might be able to learn and recreate it all. Yet, towards the conclusion of the story, she says differently. Ishiguro offers both perspectives with evidence. On the one hand, Mr. Capaldi never appears to be trustworthy, and his ambitions are rife with dystopian, technological nightmare stereotypes. Klara, on the other hand, exhibits her ability to love and feel, blurring the barrier between artificial and human intelligence. Mr. Capaldi's endeavor is one of many attempts by Klara and the son's characters to deal with loneliness. "It is me asking? I'm asking you to make this work," Chrissy says to Klara as he walks out of his studio. "Because there will be no other way for me to survive if it comes again." Chrissy's weird personal behaviors with Klara earlier in the story are explained by the reveal of Mr. Capaldi's initiative. Klara begins to see Chrissy's bitterness and rage as manifestations of fear and loneliness, much as she did with the youngsters at the interaction meeting. Similarly, Helen, Vance, and Rick's encounters are about grief, loneliness, miscommunication, and the complexities of human emotion. Helen is taken aback by Vance's rant about how she has mistreated him. Helen adored Vance, and she asks for a favor after all these years of "you're not answering my messages," as he puts it. "I've been thinking about you for minutes, hours, days, months, even years." Klara feels that Vance would assist Rick since he still loves Helen, although she grovels and they quarrel. Helen and Vance, like Coffee Cup Lady and Raincoat Man, experience a spectrum of strong emotions after not seeing each other for a long period. Helen and Vance's judgments are difficult to explain, but Klara comes to an obvious conclusion. Unlike the traditional science fiction AI, Klara's conclusions about the physical world are occasionally incorrect, but she is very perceptive and insightful when it comes to human emotion. When they discover the Cootings machine, Paul assists Klara in sacrificing a piece of her flesh, the PEG-9 solution, in order to destroy the machine, which was itself a sacrifice to the sun in return for Josie's health. Their acts resemble a traditional religious sacrifice, as they pour Klara's blood in the name of hope and faith. Paul doesn't ask many questions about Klara's strategy. He chooses to assist her because she believes in it, and he, like Chrissy and Helen, is prepared to go to any length to preserve his kid. The loss of PEG and Klara's sacrifice, the 9 solution, does not appear to cause irreversible damage, although it does decrease her perceptive powers for a while. Klara feels overwhelmed outside the theater and has trouble identifying people. Klara's loss of vision emphasizes the subject of misunderstanding and loneliness, as the shapes, sounds, and places of the people around her confound her even more. Part 5. Josie begins to lose her strength again 11 days after their excursion to the metropolis. Dr. Ryan visits every day, and Rick stops over frequently, though Josie is too sleepy to sketch. Klara asks Rick whether he would take her back to Mr. McBain's barn, and if the love between Rick and Josie is genuine, if it's a true and lasting one day. It is, according to Rick. He transports Klara to the barn, where she requests that he wait outside once again. Asking him to accept that Josie herself is completely innocent, she begs with the sun once more. She remembers the bull at Morgan's Falls, Chrissy and Paul's chats, and her sabotage of the Cootings machine. She refers to Rick and Josie's strong and lasting love, just like Coffee Cup Lady and Raincoat Man. As the sun sets, she notices the sun reflecting on a piece of glass and hopes that her plea will be heard. Klara overhears Chrissy and Dr. Ryan debating whether Josie should be admitted to the hospital for the following 3 days. Rick visits daily. Chrissy once asked Rick whether he feels like he's come out the winner because he's healthy and unlifted on a wet day. Rick remains patient, telling Chrissy that Josie had given him a message to deliver to her when the time was perfect. Josie told Rick that if she had her choice, she would have preferred to be lifted. Klara observes the sun coming out just as Chrissy is analyzing Josie's message and gets delighted. Everyone rushes upstairs when she tells them they need to check on Josie. The sun's nourishment came into the room abundantly, Klara says as she pulls the curtains wide. Josie has an obvious new strength when she wakes up. Part 5 Analysis. Part 5 of Klara and the Sun is the novel's main action, with Josie's health continuing to deteriorate and Klara and Chrissy dealing with the fallout from their day in the city. The story concludes with Josie waking up on the first day of her recuperation, feeling better. The majority of Part 5 is devoted to Klara's return to Mr. McBain's barn, where she prays to the sun once more, this time requesting it to heal Josie. Klara invokes purity and love while realizing her insignificance as in religious prayer. I know I've no right to come here like this. The sun was watching at the yard that day, Klara recalls, and she sometimes wonders why the sun hasn't aided Josie yet, given how it has aided her and cured the beggar and his dog. As a result, Klara's view of the sun reflects the Christian view of God as omniscient, omnipresent, and almighty. Klara gets flashbacks and recollections of prior incidents in the barn, which influence her prayer. She questions the sun for a moment as she remembers the bull and the emotional suffering she observed in Chrissy and strangers in the city. Klara wonders if the sun is susceptible to error, given that the bad bull was permitted to rise above the ground. She invokes Rick and Josie's love because she recalls the light shining following the reunion of Coffee Cup Lady and Raincoat Man. According to Klara, the sun must approve of love if it approved that specific scenario. She attempts to avoid sounding selfish, recalling Vance's rebuke of favoritism. As a result, Klara's plea to the sun is similar to Helen's appeal to Vance, in that both are prepared to go to great lengths to aid their loved ones. Despite their seeming craziness, Klara's cognitive processes all follow a logical logic. They can be seen as metaphors for a sentient individual's perplexing and insufficient ways of perceiving the environment and making judgments. Chrissy's venomous and unjust query about whether Rick feels like a winner reveals her deep sense of guilt. Rather than strike out, Rick replies with the kind message Josie has for him. Rick, like Klara, recognizes that Chrissy's vicious remarks are a result of her anguish. Rick, the unlifted youngster, behaves with more maturity and elegance in this scenario than any other character. Part 6. Josie improves her strength and health. After a few years, Josie decides to apply to colleges. Rick purchases an old automobile and gives it the moniker, the Wreck. He comes to see Josie regularly while she is healing, but he comes to see her much less frequently as she prepares for college. Melania has moved to California and no longer works at the White House. Rick inquires about the sun on the morning Josie started her recuperation in their final discussion. He also inquires about Klara's barn transaction, but she remains silent. I don't dare to speak about this matter even today. It was such a rare favor, and I'm afraid that if I tell anybody about it, even just Rick, the assistance Josie got would be rescinded. Klara is anxious that Rick and Josie will have distinct paths in life. Rick tells her, however, that the love on which her secret agreement was built is still real, and that they will remain linked even if they are separated. Other young women begin to come to the residence. Because Josie's room is too tiny for Klara, she remains in the utility room, a small storage area with a high window. Josie locates Klara in the utility room and constructs a platform out of trunks and boxes, allowing Klara to gaze out the window at the sun. Mr. Capaldi pays a visit to Klara's residence one day. He offers a project in which he will dissect Klara for scientific inquiry, ostensibly to dispel AF prejudice and superstition. Mr. Capaldi is irritated by Chrissy, who tells him Klara deserves better. Her gradual decline is well-deserved, 294. Mr. Capaldi's proposal is interrupted by Chrissy, who forces him to leave. Josie confides in Klara about her scholastic concerns on the last day before she departs for college. Rick was supposed to be there to say farewell, but he isn't. Chrissy drives Klara away after Josie says her goodbyes. Klara spends the remainder of her days in the yard, a massive waste landfill. She spends her time examining the broken equipment around her and reminiscing about her time with Josie, which begins to blur. The shop manager visits her one day, and they have a thoughtful talk. Klara tells manager that the family for whom she worked treated her well and that she gave good service and kept Josie from becoming lonely. 300. Rosa had a bad experience with her family, according to the manager, who is now retired. The manager doesn't seem to get Klara's explanation that she doesn't feel she could have ever genuinely been Josie. Klara observes manager's limp as he walks away. Part 6 Analysis. Part 6 spans several years, from Josie's growing up and leaving for college to Klara's slow fade in a junkyard, whereas the rest of the story takes place within a short period of time. Josie's recovery, like any other religious miracle, is never explained, nor is it linked to the son. Rick and Josie's respective childhood fears come true. Josie goes to college, while Rick buys a beat-up automobile and gets interested in personal projects. Their growing apart is painful, but they accept it, and Rick assures Klara that their love will endure despite their physical separation. Rick's goodness and emotional maturity show the necessity of love and compassion in the face of impersonal, dystopian institutions once again. Mr. Capaldi arrives to offer to dissect Klara for research, but Chrissy interrupts him and dismisses him. Chrissy, who had planned to extract Klara's AI brain for the model of Josie, is redeemed by her deed. Chrissy adores Josie, but she also develops feelings for Klara. She protects her from Mr. Capaldi, whose logic is cold and dishonest, just as it was when he was creating Josie's image. Chrissy initially ignored Klara's sentiments, but in Part 6, she informs Mr. Capaldi that Klara deserves better, confirming her love and validating her emotional ability. Klara is approached by the manager in the novel's closing scene, who walks the junkyard to collect little souvenirs. Their discussion touches on several of the novel's major topics. The manager, who is now old and lonely, is overjoyed to meet Klara, who tells her that she believes she saved Josie from loneliness. While Klara is capable of love and fear, she never feels lonely. When the kind yardman offers to place her closer to some other AFs, she says she is content with her special spot. Finally, Josie informs manager that she could never entirely replace Josie, since the special aspect of her soul existed between her and those who loved her, not within her. This might be seen as Ishiguro's response to the topic of the human heart and soul. Love and humanity do not exist in isolation. By definition, they are connected, making isolation impossible. Character analysis. Klara. Klara is the narrator and protagonist of Klara and the Sun. She is uniquely perceptive and observant, but her programming contains significant gaps in metaphysical and scientific understanding. While shrewd, insightful, and reflective on certain topics, she is also naive. She is never deceitful, but her perceptive limits result in her confident presentation of misinformation. Ishiguro does not provide abundant context and detail for the universe of his novel, so the reader must decide when Klara is analyzing a situation incorrectly. Klara, whose name means clarity, is particularly adept at recognizing and distilling human emotions, even for an AF. She can tell when people are sad, even if they are trying to hide it, and can pick up a person's underlying feelings, even if their words contradict them. Her understanding of the inanimate world, on the other hand, is less complete. Her spatial awareness is made up of an array of boxes, but she can get confused easily if an area is cluttered or if objects or people move around. For some reason, she is not programmed with scientific knowledge of the sun, which allows her to believe that the sun rests in Mr. McBain's barn, and to treat it as an omnipotent god. Klara's perceptive strengths and weaknesses are a reversal of the standard science fiction trope of androids, who tend to be portrayed as physically and mathematically superhuman, but oblivious to the subtleties of human emotion. Klara's design and main goal are to help Josie, and specifically to prevent her from feeling lonely. She uses her observational skills to gather information, usually to learn how to better serve Josie. Still, she demonstrates desires of her own at times. While she never gets lonely, she enjoys watching the sun, is excited to see Morgan's Falls, and prefers Josie to the girl with the short spiky hair, 31, who comes into the store. Like Chrissy, Klara has preferences of her own but is willing to do anything for Josie's sake. Josie. Kind, precocious, and mature, Josie is loved by her family and Klara. Her illness prevents her from living an active life, and while she often brushes off concerns about her waning health, there are moments in which her fear of death breaks through. She loves Rick but can be blunt and insensitive to him. Josie is kind and insightful. She is, in some ways, a human mirror to Klara, which strengthens their friendship. Despite her academic ability, knowledge of adult topics, and lack of pretense, Josie, like Klara, represents innocence. She deserves to enjoy her childhood, but instead, she is sick because of the procedure that was done to her. Like Klara, she is curious about the world around her, and she wants the people in her life to be happy. She minimizes her illness in an attempt to assuage her mother's worries and guilt, and finally relays the message through Rick that if given the choice, she would be lifted again. Josie is a complex character, but her traits aren't as symbolic or plot contingent as those of other characters. Klara concludes at the end of the novel that there isn't necessarily anything special inside Josie, but that her soul exists in the hearts of those that love her. Structurally, Josie serves as a vessel for love from Klara, Rick, her parents, and Melania. Her love is necessarily unique because it is specific to her, but not contingent on any one aspect of her personality. Chrissy. Josie's mother, Chrissy, is perhaps the most complex and contradictory character presented in Klara and the Sun. She is devoted to Josie, doing everything she can for her, but has her own needs as well. Upon first seeing Chrissy, Klara says, "I could see the deep etch around her mouth and also a kind of angry exhaustion in her eyes." For years, Chrissy has been dealing with guilt about her daughter Sal's death and Josie's sickness, both of which resulted indirectly from her decision to have them lifted. Chrissy's guilt is also a product of love. In Chrissy's mind, both Sal and Josie wouldn't have been content without the opportunities afforded by genetic editing, and so she took the risk both times. Chrissy often deals with her guilt by lashing out. At the interaction meeting, she makes another parent feel bad for making a clumsy comment. She says harsh and unfair things to Josie, Rick, and Klara, and at times tortures herself by replaying memories and having Klara imitate Josie. Still, she loves Josie and eventually comes to love Klara. Chrissy has a model made of Sal after Sal's death, but it doesn't work out. She tries again with Josie, planning this time to use Klara's perceptive consciousness. She feels strongly that in the event of Josie's death, she will not be able to go on without Josie's replacement, but Paul tells Klara that Chrissy will never accept an android Josie in her heart. Chrissy's character in Klara and the Sun is thus defined by her contradictions. She loves Josie but loses hope in her recovery. She buys Klara, planning to dismantle her, but finally defends Klara from Mr. Capaldi's designs. Rick. Rick lives close to Josie with his mother, Helen, and is Josie's best friend. They grew up together and have a vague plan to be there for each other through life. Rick has a British accent because his mother is from England. Rick's mother has much less money than Chrissy, and Rick was never lifted. Rick often worries that Josie getting lifted will change her and that she will become spoiled and pretentious, like the other wealthy lifted children. For this reason, he is initially suspicious of Klara, but soon recognizes her empathy and love for Josie. Like Chrissy, Rick sometimes shows his love for Josie in unproductive ways, acting out of jealousy. Still, Rick is mature and level-headed compared with the adults. He accepts Josie with her illness and responds to Chrissy's guilty reproach with grace. The phenomenon of lifting children is, overall, presented as a dystopian evil. it amplifies economic inequality and carries enormous health risks, all in the name of competition. Rick is smart, decent, well-spoken, and caring, despite being unlifted. For Ishiguro, Rick is a symbol of inherent goodness in humanity, which cannot be engineered, and which stands in opposition to the capitalist eugenics of lifting children. Helen. Rick's mother, Helen, grew up in England and used to work in the theater. Like Chrissy, she is separated from her child's father and feels regret and guilt about her decision regarding lifting, even though her decision was the opposite of Chrissy's. To assuage her guilt and because she loves Rick, she tries her best to manipulate others into helping Rick get into Atlas Brookings. She comes across as blunt, honest, and eccentric, but reveals at the meeting with Vance and Rick that she is willing to do anything to achieve her goal of helping Rick succeed. Her apologies to Vance may or may not have been sincere, but by the end of the meeting, she only cares whether or not they were enough to get Vance to help Rick. Paul. Paul is Josie's father. He is a talented engineer, but was substituted at his job and now lives in a community with other unemployable ex-professionals. Through Paul, we learn something about the political landscape in the world of Klara and the Sun. Paul's community is white, and he contends that, if another group won't respect us and what we have, they need to know they'll fight with their hands. Because he loves Josie and is willing to try anything, Paul helps Klara to sabotage the Cootings machine. He is more antagonistic toward Mr. Capaldi than Chrissy, but confides in Klara that deep down he is afraid he might agree with Mr. Capaldi's rationalist reasoning. Like Chrissy and Helen, Paul is willing to go to great lengths to save Josie. Mr. Capaldi. Mr. Capaldi is the antagonist of Klara and the Sun. He exemplifies the cold, scientific reasoning associated with the novel's dystopian features, genetic editing, and the plan to create an android copy of Josie. While his project never comes to fruition, he can be seen as a modern analog to Dr. Frankenstein, attempting to create new life through technological advancement. In both of his scenes, Mr. Capaldi tries to convince Chrissy, Paul, and Klara that his projects are harmless, and that any reservations they have are just remnants of antiquated, sentimental attitudes. Mr. Capaldi is outwardly kind, and his arguments can be persuasive and comforting, but his attitude belies an abandonment of humanity and faith. Themes. Fear of loneliness. Almost every character in Klara and the Sun is attempting to avoid being lonely. The AF's mission is to keep separated youngsters from becoming lonely. Chrissy, Rick, Paul, and Josie are all motivated by a fear of loneliness in various ways. Paul avoids loneliness by associating with a like-minded group of people. The manager spends her retirement wandering the junkyard, trying to run upon old AFs she used to know. Vance still loves Helen, but he humiliates her in retribution for the loneliness she caused him. Helen, on the other hand, has chosen loneliness, informing Klara that, in a life like mine, there are all kinds of other very good reasons why one might prefer loneliness. In the past, I've made similar decisions. She welcomes loneliness, since it may imply a better life for Rick, and it helps her to escape her shame and sins from the past. If Chrissy dies, she intends to replace her ailing daughter with an android. I came through it with Sal, but I can't do it again, she tells Klara. She has experienced sadness and loneliness before when Sal died, and she badly wants to prevent it a second time. The grown-ups in Klara and the Sun go to great lengths to prevent feeling lonely, as seen by their actions. Rick and Josie are both frightened of losing their friendship, so they make pledges to one another to be together indefinitely. Each is filled with bitterness and the fear of being abandoned. Rick is worried that Josie will alter to fit in with her stuffy friends if she doesn't work hard enough to get into Atlas Brookings, their last chance of continuing in the same professional class. Rick and Josie's plan, ironically, turns out to be a healthier strategy than those devised by grown-ups. By the end of the book, Rick and Josie have grown apart, but they still have a mutual understanding, and the love they share will live on in each of them. Faith and hope are important. Klara often expresses her optimism that Josie would improve despite her deteriorating condition. Her optimism for Josie's future stems from her overall good outlook and her belief in the son's kindness and power. Different people react to her beliefs in different ways. I believe there's no reason for hope, Klara says to Rick after leaving Mr. McBain's barn for the first time. I have hope for Josie, but first I must do a mission. Rick does not press her for further details. He is impressed by Klara's hope and is determined to help her because he too wants to help Josie. Similarly, despite having no understanding of what the Cootings machine has to do with Josie, Paul goes along with Klara's plot to sabotage it. Klara realizes this in her second plea to the son. You must have seen how the father, too, helped and did his utmost, even though he knew nothing about the son's kind agreement, because he saw my hope and placed his faith in it. Klara's positivism, on the other hand, might be insulting to Chrissy. When Sal died, her expectations were broken, and she now sees hope as a futile coping technique, shouting to Klara at Morgan's Falls, "You think you know more than the doctors? Do you do more than I do? Your sister, too, made commitments. However, she was unable to maintain them. Don't you follow suit?" She calms herself later in the car and allows herself to hope. You're an intelligent AF. Perhaps you see things that the rest of us don't. Perhaps you're correct to be optimistic. Chrissy is frequently torn between the optimism she desires and the logic she employs to defend herself. Mr. Capaldi's technical scheme is the polar opposite of optimism and faith, which Chrissy finally rejects. Capaldi's devotion to science is an idolatrous rejection of religion in a Christian environment. The son and Klara's religion leaves the reader wondering, like Rick did, if the son and Klara's faith had a role in Josie's recovery. Because the essence of religion is determined by its unanswerability, Ishiguro provides no conclusive proof in either direction. Klara believes Josie was cured by the son even after she recovers, but no one knows for sure. The nature of learning through perception. Surprisingly, Ishiguro employs an artificial narrator as a singular prism through which to examine the boundaries of human perception. If her time at the AF shop is comparable to her upbringing, the anecdotal occurrences she witnesses are the events that leave a lasting imprint on her impressionable mind. Customers and passers-by exhibit a wide range of emotions, which Klara observes. Her inherent curiosity prompts her to pay closer attention to what she sees, and as a result, she develops a high sense of emotional literacy. Klara is just a year or two old when she is purchased by Chrissy and Josie, and the AF shop has been her entire life. Every new location, such as Chrissy's house and the roads between the houses in the barn, requires her to watch and learn. When seeing the beggar and his dog rise from the ground after the sun shines on them, Klara thinks that they must have been resurrected from the dead by the sun. Despite being made by a reasonable automated system, this may appear to the reader to be an irrational deduction. The degree to which sentient beings misunderstand their surroundings is reflected in Klara's perceptual mistakes. When Klara runs short on the PEG-9 solution and tries to make sense of the crowd outside the theater, Ishiguro exposes the fragility of perception. Klara's experiences of the natural world are skewed as a result of her technological restrictions. This sets her apart from previous androids in literature and movies, who have a superhuman understanding of the material world but lack emotional intelligence. Klara's impressions of the material world, on the other hand, are similar to those of a kid, despite her great emotional intelligence. This begs the issue of why her programmers didn't include the most fundamental aspects of human understanding, such as the sun's function, in her code. Limiting Klara's perceptual abilities may provide her with a feeling of wonder about the world, allowing her to be a more effective emotional partner. Expression of love through sacrifice. Parents make sacrifices for their children throughout Klara and the son. Helen is prepared to put herself on the line for Rick's sake, accepting a life of solitude and groveling in front of her ex-lover. Despite their opposing decisions, Chrissy's shame and sacrifice match Helen's. Chrissy was well aware of the dangers of lifting Josie, since she had experienced them with Sal, yet she risked and sacrificed her peace of mind for Josie's sake. Klara gives up a piece of her flesh in the hopes of aiding Josie. "I don't mind that I lost precious fluid," she tells the son, adding that she would have given even more if it had been necessary. "I would have gladly donated more, all of it, if it meant you helping Josie in a specific way." Her self-sacrifice can be interpreted in a variety of religious and cultural settings. She, like Christ, gives up a portion of herself for the sake of a helpless person. She does, however, sacrifice the Kuding's machine, which she claims enrages the sun, evoking other sacred traditions. Chrissy and Helen's parenting choices and sacrifices are driven by guilt, but they are also acts of love. Klara understands this, and it aids her in comprehending the essence of love as rooted in interpersonal behaviors. Symbols and motifs. Windows. In Klara and the Sun, Ishiguro employs windows as a metaphor for the human condition, which is defined by love, but also by tight restrictions. They represent both our perspective's bounds and the soul's openness. Klara adores the AF shop window because it brings in natural light and helps her to explore and satisfy her curiosity about the outside world. People and automobiles pass by, allowing her to see and learn, but her viewpoint remains constant, causing her to mistake the meaning of some occurrences. In the same way, the window in Josie's room provides warmth, light, and deceit. Most nights, Klara and Josie watch the sunset together, and it is a source of joy and bonding for them. Josie goes out of her way to help Klara obtain a glimpse via a window when she is confined to the utility room, displaying her devotion to Klara. Melania had the blinds closed at the end of Part 5, but Klara opens them, enabling the sunlight to flow in and Josie to begin her recovery. The sun appears to enter Mr. McBain's barn when it sets due to the angle of the window and the house's placement, causing Klara to assume that the sun sleeps there at night. Windows in Klara and the Sun can be seen as an iteration of Plato's allegory of the cave, in which cave dwellers identify the shadows cast on the wall by items in front of a fire. The cave dwellers' shadows are accurate, but they do not reflect objective reality. Ishiguro acknowledges the constraints of human experience as an aspect of reality, but Plato contended a system of science and philosophy that transcends the cave. The Sun. The sun is Ishiguro's representation of God. Because she gets her energy and existence from the sun, Klara naturally thinks that the sun has extraordinary abilities over all living things. Her religion and prayers reflect her understanding of the sun, which is similar to a variety of religious traditions and theologies. Klara, like Christ, gives up her own body. She, like Job, has her doubts about the sun's benevolence, and she wonders what Josie did to earn her affliction. Her sacrifice of the Kuding's machine, as well as the sun's ubiquity in many polytheistic and ancient mythology, evokes pre-Christian devotion. The sun's symbolism may be extended to a universal notion of God as kindness and love because it does not adhere to any one religious paradigm. Through the irony of a future robot reverting to the old custom of sun worship, Klara's bond with the sun also depicts the recurrence of history and human behavior. The Bull. Klara sees a bull looking at her in a field near Morgan's Falls, and it stays with her, causing her to have flashbacks anytime she is scared or disheartened. The bull, according to Klara, belongs deep down, and the sun may have made a mistake by permitting it to show its face on the surface. Its presence on this grass could only have terrible consequences. The horned bull denotes unknown evil, terror, hell, death, and destruction, much as the sun represents both God and larger esoteric ideals of good and love. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. If you liked it, I would appreciate it if you leave a review. Condensed books.